The woman screamed, and nobody moved. It happened at 9:47 on a Tuesday night on the downtown platform of the 181st Street Station in Washington Heights, and 14 people heard it, and not one of them stepped forward. 3 young men had her backed against the tile wall near the last bench, her grocery bag split open on the concrete, oranges rolling slowly toward the tracks, and the tallest of the 3 had her purse strap wound around his fist, while she held on to the other end with both hands, and the kind of shaking desperation that comes from knowing the bag contains your rent money and your medication, and that nobody on this platform is going to help you. She was 71 years old. Her name was Edna Garza. She had been riding the subway alone for 46 years. She had never once been afraid of it until this moment. 30 feet away, at the far end of the platform, a man in a dark canvas jacket stood perfectly still. His eyes were open but saw nothing. He had not seen anything in 3 years, but he had heard the scream before it became a scream, had heard the change in foot traffic, the sudden absence of the low murmur that platforms carry when people feel safe, the particular scrape of shoes moving backward instead of forward that tells a trained ear someone is being cornered. Beside him, the massive German shepherd in a guide harness had already stopped breathing the way he breathed when the world was ordinary. Titan's hackles rose like a ridgeline. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end, because what happens next on that platform is something no one who was there will ever be able to explain without their voice breaking. We read every single comment. Master Chief Petty Officer Cole Hayes, retired United States Navy, had lost his sight on a Thursday afternoon in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, when a pressure plate IED detonated 11 feet from the vehicle he was riding in and sent a wave of concussive force and superheated shrapnel through the windshield at a velocity his body would remember for the rest of his life, even if his eyes never would. The blast killed the driver. It killed the interpreter seated behind him. It left Cole with second-degree burns across the left side of his face, a shattered left orbital bone, and bilateral optic nerve damage so complete that the surgeons at Walter Reed had told him, with the careful gentleness of people delivering permanent information, that no procedure currently available or in development was likely to restore his vision. He was 42 years old. He stood 6'2" and carried 215 pounds with the particular stillness of a man whose body had been a weapon for 20 years and who had learned, in the 3 years since losing his sight, to redistribute every ounce of the awareness that had once lived in his eyes into his ears, his hands, the soles of his feet, and the steady presence of the dog at his left side. His hair was dark and cut regulation close, though no regulation required it anymore. His jaw was square and clean-shaven, and the burns scarring along his left temple and cheekbone had faded to a pale topography that people noticed and looked away from, and then looked back at because they couldn't help it. His eyes were pale blue, striking, direct, and absolutely still. They tracked nothing. They saw nothing. But they held, in their stillness, the expression of a man who had spent 2 decades looking at the most difficult things the world could produce, and whose gaze had not flinched even when the looking was taken from him. He had completed 6 deployments with Naval Special Warfare, 4 in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq's Anbar province, and 1 in a location in East Africa whose name he had been instructed to forget. He held a silver star, 2 bronze stars with valor, and a Purple Heart. He had led direct action raids in places where the night was the only cover, and the margin between success and catastrophe was measured in fractions of a second and fractions of an inch. He had been, by every measure the Navy uses, one of the most effective operators of his generation. And then a buried artillery shell packed with homemade explosive had taken his sight and ended his career in the time it takes to exhale. And Cole Hayes had spent the next 3 years learning to live inside a darkness that was not metaphorical and was not going away. He lived alone in a fourth-floor walk-up in Washington Heights. He received his disability pension. He attended appointments at the VA. He did not feel sorry for himself. Self-pity required a kind of energy he had never had time for and saw no reason to develop now. What he did feel, in the quieter hours, was the particular weight of a man who had been defined entirely by his capacity to act and who was now learning, slowly and without instruction, how to be still. He had Titan. Titan was a 6-year-old German Shepherd who weighed 86 pounds and who had served 2 deployments as a multi-purpose canine with SEAL Team 4 before a piece of shrapnel from a mortar round in Nangarhar province had torn a 4-inch gash across his right flank and ended his operational career. The scar ran diagonally from his ribcage to his hip, a pale seam beneath the dense black and tan fur that covered him like a second uniform. Dark along the saddle and spine, warming to deep amber across his chest and legs, thick enough that New York's November wind moved through it without reaching the skin beneath. He had been retrained as a guide dog through a specialized program for wounded veterans that matched retired military working dogs with their former handlers. And the process had taken 4 months and cost the program $22,000. And Cole had told them he would pay it himself if the funding fell through. It didn't fall through. But he would have. Titan did not move through the world the way civilian guide dogs move. He moved with operational awareness, ears rotating like satellite dishes, body calibrated to the space around his handler with a precision that went beyond training into something closer to shared consciousness. He had been with Cole through combat. He had been with Cole through the blast. He had been with Cole through the darkness that followed, and through the long months of rehabilitation where Cole had relearned how to navigate a world he could no longer see. Titan was not a pet. Titan was not an accommodation. Titan was the last active member of a team that had once been the most dangerous thing in any room it entered. And the fact that the team now consisted of a blind man and a scarred dog did not change, in any way that mattered, what that team was capable of. The 181st Street station smelled like concrete dust and old electricity, and the particular metallic cold that subway stations hold in November, like a memory of every winter that has ever passed through them. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that most people stopped hearing after 30 seconds, but that Cole had never stopped hearing, because his world was built entirely of sounds now, and every frequency was information. The platform was not crowded. 14 people, spaced unevenly along the length of the station, waiting for the A train that the display board said was 9 minutes away. The air moved in the slow, stale circulation of underground spaces that have been breathing recycled air for a century. Cole had heard the 3 men before he'd heard the woman. They had come down the stairs at the south entrance with the particular cadence of young men who believe the space they enter belongs to them. Voices too loud for the acoustic, laughter that dared anyone to comment, footsteps that landed with intentional weight. He had cataloged them automatically. 3 voices, early to mid-20s, alcohol present in the looseness of their consonants, 1 dominant voice and 2 that followed. He didn't know yet what they would do. He knew what they were. Then the woman's voice changed. Not a scream, not yet. The sharp intake of breath that precedes one. The sound of a strap being pulled. The sound of produce hitting concrete. Titan stopped. Completely. The dog's body went rigid against Cole's left leg. The harness handle transmitted the change instantly. Not a pull, not a redirect, but a full system lock that Cole had felt exactly 4 times in the years since they'd been partnered. And that had never once been wrong. Titan's breathing shifted to the shallow, controlled rhythm that military canines are trained to adopt in threat environments. A low sound came from deep in his chest, not a growl. The precursor to one. The sound that tells another predator, "I see you." Cole turned his head toward the sound. He couldn't see. He didn't need to. "What's happening?" he said to Titan. Not a question. An acknowledgement. The dog leaned into his leg, which meant, "Move forward." They moved. Not fast. Cole walked with the cane in his right hand and the harness handle in his left, and Titan guided him down the platform with a directness that was not typical of guide work, not the gentle, curving navigation of obstacles, but a straight, deliberate line toward the source of the sound. People on the platform watched them approach. Nobody else moved. He didn't know yet that the tallest of the three men was named Derek Layton, or that Derek was 26 years old and the youngest son of Arthur Layton, whose real estate development company held commercial leases on 37 properties in Upper Manhattan, and whose name appeared on enough donation plaques in enough city offices that Derek had grown up inside the understanding that consequences were something that happened to other people's children. Derek had been arrested twice, once for assault outside a club in Midtown and once for criminal mischief after putting a man through a plate glass window in Soho. And both times the charges had been quietly reduced and then dismissed after Arthur Layton's attorney made phone calls that Derek never heard and never had to hear. Derek's friends, Parker and Brandon, operated on the same principle. They had learned, through years of evidence, that the city's systems bent around men with their last names, the way water bends around stone. They had Edna Garza's purse halfway off her shoulder when Cole stopped 6 feet from them. "Let go of her back," Cole said. The platform went quiet. Not the quiet of attention, the quiet of people holding their breath. Derek turned. He saw a man in a dark jacket with burned scars on his face and blind eyes that looked through him and past him and at nothing, holding a white cane, standing beside a German shepherd in a harness. He processed this information in the way men like him process information about people they consider beneath them, quickly, dismissively, and with a contempt that came so naturally it didn't even register as a choice. "Mind your business, blind man," Derek said. Parker laughed. Brandon shifted his weight. Cole did not move. Titan did not move. Near the center of the platform, a woman named Rosa Delgado gripped the handle of her rolling cart until her knuckles went white. She was 58 years old. She had worked the closing shift at the pharmacy on St. Nicholas Avenue for 11 years. She had seen things on this platform that she had never told her daughter about, because telling them would mean admitting that the city she had raised her children in was not always the city she wanted it to be. She watched the blind man standing in front of 3 young men who were twice his speed and had every physical advantage the world recognizes. And she felt something shift inside her chest. Not fear, though fear was there. Something older than fear. The particular shame of watching someone do the thing you know you should be doing. Derek dropped Edna's purse strap and took 2 steps toward Cole. Not to leave, to close distance. The way men close distance, when they want the person in front of them to feel the size difference, the heat of their breathing, the proximity of what could happen next. "You can't even see me," Derek said. He said it slowly, close enough now that Cole could smell the whiskey on his breath, the synthetic cologne, the specific chemical confidence of a young man who has never been hit by anything that didn't apologize afterward. "You want to be a hero?" "With what?" He gestured at the cane, though the gesture was wasted on a man who couldn't see it. "You going to tap me to death?" Parker and Brandon laughed. The sound echoed off the tile and came back flattened, hollow. Cole stood perfectly still. His face showed nothing. not anger, not fear, not even determination. The complete absence of visible emotion that comes from a man who has been in rooms so dangerous that the only way to survive them was to let everything that wasn't operational awareness fall away, until all that remained was the mission and the breathing and the dog. His hands did not tighten on the cane. His posture did not shift. He existed in the kind of stillness that most people never encounter in their lives, and that a very specific kind of person recognizes instantly as the most dangerous thing in any room. Derek did not recognize it. He had never been in those rooms. "Walk away," Derek said. He put one hand on Cole's chest and pushed. Not hard enough to move him. Cole weighed 215 pounds and was rooted, but hard enough to constitute contact. Hard enough that everyone on the platform who was watching understood that a line had just been crossed. The silence between Cole's first statement and what he said next lasted exactly long enough for everyone on the platform to understand that the man with the cane was not afraid. "I'm going to say it once more," Cole said. His voice carried the flat, unhurried authority of a man who had given commands in rooms where obedience was the difference between survival and body bags. "Step back from her, stand still, and put your hands where they belong." "Or what?" Derek said. "What are you going to do about it?" Titan answered before Cole did. The dog stepped forward, not lunging, not barking, but placing himself between Cole and Derek Layton with a precision that was not trained obedience, but something older and more permanent. He stood sideways, blocking Derek's path, and his body dropped into the low, squared posture that military working dogs adopt when they have identified a target and are waiting for a single word. His lips drew back. The titanium gleam of his left canine caught the fluorescent light. The sound that came from his chest was no longer a precursor. It was the full, sustained growl of an 86-pound predator who had been trained by the United States military to do exactly one thing when someone threatened his handler, and who was currently exercising every ounce of his considerable discipline not to do it. Derek Layton stopped walking. His face changed. "That dog," Cole said, "spent 2 years in Afghanistan doing things that would make you cry. I spent 20. You're standing on a subway platform at 10 o'clock at night, harassing a 70-year-old woman, and you think the blind man is the one with a problem." He paused. The pause was not for effect. It was the particular silence of a man who is giving someone a final opportunity to make a decision that will determine everything that happens next. "I called transit police from the top of the stairs. They'll be here in about 3 minutes. You can leave before they get here, or you can stay and explain to them why you're on camera robbing an elderly woman in front of 14 witnesses. That's your choice. You have about 2 minutes left to make it." He hadn't called from the top of the stairs. He'd spoken the command to his phone, a single voice-activated phrase, the moment Titan had locked up on the platform. The call had connected while he was walking. Transit Police Dispatch had heard everything. Derek looked at Titan. Titan looked at Derek. The dog had not blinked. "My father will bury you," Derek said. His voice had changed. The entitlement was still there, but it was wrapped around something smaller now. The particular sound of a man reaching for a weapon that has always worked before, and finding, for the first time, that it weighs nothing. Cole said nothing. He did not need to. Parker moved first, backing toward the stairs, pulling Brandon with him. Derek stood alone for 4 more seconds. Then he turned and walked. Not ran. Walked. The walk of a man who wants to believe he is still in control and whose legs have already accepted that he isn't. Edna Garza was sitting on the bench, clutching her purse with both hands, her oranges still scattered across the platform. Titan walked to her, sat beside her, and pressed his flank against her leg. She looked down at him. She placed one shaking hand on his head. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you." She said it to the dog. Transit police arrived in 4 minutes. 2 officers. They took Cole's statement, Edna's statement, and the statements of 3 witnesses who had not moved during the confrontation, but who were now, in the aftermath, willing to describe what they'd seen. The station's security cameras had recorded everything. Derek Layton was identified by 11:15 that night. Parker and Brandon were identified by the following morning. Derek was arrested at his father's apartment on the Upper West Side 2 days later. The charge was attempted robbery in the 2nd degree and menacing. Arthur Layton's attorney appeared within the hour. This time the attorney's phone calls did not produce the usual result. The video had already been shared with the district attorney's office by the Transit Authority, and the DA, running for re-election in a cycle where subway safety was the dominant issue, declined to reduce the charges. Derek Layton pled guilty to menacing and was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a restitution payment to Edna Garza that his father wrote a check for without looking at the amount. Parker received 12 months of probation. Brandon received 12 months of probation and a suspended sentence for a prior warrant that surfaced during processing. Arthur Layton's attorney billed $11,000 for representation and did not call the DA's office again. 5 months later, the May sun came through the window of a diner on 181st Street, where Cole Hayes sat in a booth near the door with a cup of coffee he could feel cooling between his hands. Titan lay beneath the table with his chin on Cole's boot, eyes half closed, the slow sweep of his tail brushing the tile floor in the rhythm of an animal who has decided that this particular moment contains nothing that requires his attention. Edna Garza sat across from Cole. She came to this diner every Tuesday now, the same day of the week it had happened. And she sat in the same booth, and she ordered coffee. And she talked to Cole about her grandchildren and her garden, and the rent increase her landlord had just announced, and the way the A train was always late on Tuesdays, always, as if Tuesday itself was the problem. She brought Titan a piece of roast chicken wrapped in foil every single week. She never forgot. Cole lifted the coffee. The burn scars on his left hand caught the light from the window. His eyes saw nothing, the same nothing they had seen every day since Helmand. But his face, turned toward the warmth of the sun, held an expression that the people who knew him before the blast would not have recognized. It was not peace exactly. It was the absence of waiting. For 2 decades he had moved toward danger, with the understanding that stillness was a luxury, earned only after the mission was complete. Now the mission was different. It was Tuesday. It was coffee. It was the sound of a 71-year-old woman laughing at something her youngest granddaughter had said, and the weight of an 86-pound dog resting on his boot with the full, trusting stillness of an animal who knew, with the certainty that only years of shared darkness can produce, that the man above him would not leave, would not look away, would not stop listening for the sound of something wrong in any room they entered together, for as long as they both were breathing. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they arrive as a growl on a subway platform at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, low and steady, and carrying the full weight of everything a dog has been taught to protect. Sometimes God doesn't send rescue in the forms we recognize. He sends it through the ones the world has already counted out, through blind eyes that see more clearly than the ones that turned away, through scarred hands that still reach forward, through a loyalty so deep it doesn't require sight to navigate. We spend our lives looking for strength in the obvious places. But the most powerful man on that platform couldn't see a thing. He didn't need to. He had spent 20 years learning to listen. And beside him stood a dog who had never once stopped. If this story touched your heart, Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that courage doesn't always look the way we expect, and that the ones the world overlooks are sometimes the ones God has placed exactly where they need to be. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you have ever been the person who stood still when someone needed you to move, or the person who moved when everyone else stood still, we want to hear that story. It may be the one that changes someone's mind tonight. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the quiet power of people who refuse to stop protecting others, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next journey. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you always, you are never, ever alone, not even in the dark.